We might ask how this simple parable of the weeds and the wheat was heard by first century ears. The answer, according to a cultural historian, is that it was understood as a tale told to say, the one who laughs last laughs best. The details of the story actually rang very true in Jesus' own day, because life in every small agricultural village was rife with the dynamics of rival and feuding clans who had been fighting for centuries, the original cause long forgotten, but the subsequent and more recent volleys always fresh fuel to increase the feuding fire. This was an honor and shame-based society in which you bested your rivals or enemies not by killing them, but by embarrassing them in front of everyone. Thus, that an enemy would undertake the not-so-funny practical joke of secretly sowing weeds in someone's wheat field was not all that far-fetched, because by doing so, he would make a fool of his rival, and all the village would laugh, especially if the one who had been bested displayed his surprise and his anger in a big way. But in the parable, the one who has been fooled doesn't really overreact. He does not even have his servants remove the weeds that were planted to mock him, but rather lets them grow alongside the grain until harvest. Then he separates them into grain for the barn, and the weeds as abundant fuel for his fires. Thus, in turn, he laughs at the enemy who sought to harm him, because in the end, he has actually helped him. Of course, Jesus told this parable in response to that age-old nagging question of why God allows his enemies to live. Because in the parable, the world is God's field, one created for good grain, but some of the seed that is sown produces weeds. Why doesn't God pull the plants that don't serve his purposes? Why doesn't God uproot those who would mock him? The parable explains that God doesn't overreact, but is patient and will wait for the day of final harvest to sort all things out. But in the telling of the parable, Jesus makes it clear that in the end, God will not be shamed, but honored. So the parable stands as an answer for us today as to why God just doesn't strike with lightning those who might deny him, and those who, by the manner of their lives, defy him and his commandments. Indeed, those who by the evil they promote, whether it's on a small scale or a larger one, seem to reveal themselves to be agents of God's ancient enemy. But as humans, we are impatient. God is not. We want justice now. God says judgment can wait. We feel the urgency of the passing of time and the coming of the end of the world, at least for us, and we don't want to leave it unless things have been made right. Yet, God sees from a different perspective, the perspective of eternity. So the message to us is not to be disturbed, as we might tend to be, by those who dishonor God by doing whatever they want, rather than being obedient to his laws. Indeed, those who deny God and defy him, as daily is done in countless many ways in the world today by people who have no fear of God and probably no belief in him. The parable teaches that in the end it will be revealed beyond all doubt that God is ultimately victorious and always has been, that God was not mocked because his enemies will in the end amount to nothing, while those who prove to be his faithful followers, though often not counted or noticed, will in the end be many, and they will be gathered into the joy and peace of his kingdom. So although we may at times long for that day, because at present we are sometimes regarded as fools for even believing in God and persevering in that faith, for limiting our pleasures and our pursuits in order to obey God's laws, we must trust that ultimately this will prove to have been the way of wisdom. So holding on to that certainty no matter what, even in the face of ridicule at times, let us be patient and let God be God and permit his plan to unfold in his time and in his way, assured by this little parable that in the end God will have the last word, if not the last laugh.